Good morning. So, been an interesting morning. I was halfway here. My muffler fell off in the middle of the 210. So, again, when you get to a certain age, stuff falls off of things. It's as simple as that. So, it is nice to be here. It's just been about 6.5 months since I was here last time. So, so I guess at some level, if you're a macroeconomist, the world doesn't change that rapidly. But of course, if you've been watching the news for the last 7 months, it sure has. And honestly, even thinking up to just the last week with all the stuff in the Middle East, and again having to think about how that, if you will, alters the path of things. But as always, you can't let these week-to-week turmoil offset you from where you see things going, because the momentum of our economy is a lot more, shall we say. It's got a lot of momentum. It's as simple as that. And as a result of that, even little things don't really change it from the course it is on. We're here, of course, to talk about housing, the Inland Empire, the bigger picture, where interest rates going, why are they going to go there, where are the bumps in the road, so to speak. And really, what an insane year and a couple months it has been, right? Trump, of course, won the election back in 2024. He said when he gets back in office, he's going to shake things up. And that's exactly what he's done. Like him or hate him, it is absolute bedlam in D.C., 48-hour news cycle. And just the sheer mass of headlines can be really disconcerting. And in a very real sense, what you need to do is kind of push past those to see what's truly going on and where this whole thing is heading. But that said, I can tell you that people don't like that kind of uncertainty. They don't like the 48-hour news cycle. And you can see that in the collapse of the Consumer Sentiment Index to close to the lowest it's ever been. The Policy Uncertainty Index is still elevated. And even in the last 6 months since I've been with you last time, we continue to get the slew of negative headlines. We obviously are seeing some very slow hiring in the labor markets. We continue to hear more and more about the K-shaped recovery, America's affordability crisis, housing affordability crisis. And let's, of course, not forget the tariff situation. While it is true the Supreme Court shot down the initial set of tariffs, of course, Trump continues to discuss other methods he's going to use, and he's got his 10 to 15%. And so that still remains out there as well. So it seems pretty, obviously, a lot of volatility. And of course, my very favorite economist in the world, Mark Zandi, by the way, that's tongue-in-cheek for the record, also came out recently and keeps talking about how the housing market seems to be slowing down dramatically, and there, of course, there's an advanced chance of a recession in the next year. And honestly, has Mark Zandi said anything other than this in the last 15 years? At all? Once? And that's part of the problem. As you all know, I spend a lot of time talking about narratives versus reality. And one of the first things to keep in mind about narratives versus reality, it's not like these economists, guys like Zandi, are somehow or other above the narrative. In fact, I would argue it's guys like Zandi who are the problem with the narrative. Because what he does is he hides behind a mask of expertise to tout total bullshit. And as I get into this, I'm going to talk in a couple places about Zandi and how absolutely wrong he is, and how he really is, if anything, part of the problem rather than being part of the solution. And here in California, our economic outlook is gloomy. Highest poverty rate in the nation, tied with Louisiana. Our affordability crisis is amazing. Here we are in the midst of this crazy gubernatorial election, and the word out of everybody's mouth, both parties, is affordability, 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 as if somehow or other they just discovered that California was a little bit of a pricey place to live. And let's not even talk about the budget situation. But again, you can't let this stuff get into your head, right? The basic rule of newspapers is if it bleeds, it leads. And they take all the negative narratives and they magnify them like crazy. And if you want to be in the news, that means you got to lean into the negative narrative, and you got to be part of that. And that's one of the reasons why these forecasters keep making these horrible predictions. The 2019 real estate recession, that never happened. The 2020 pandemic depression, that never happened. The 2023 yield curve recession, that didn't happen. And of course, last year's tariff recession, which again, didn't happen, right? In fact, what's interesting is thinking about where our economy is right now. Believe it or not, in the beginning of 2026, forecasters are actually getting more optimistic. They're backing off those recession claims from last year. And it looks as if people are actually more optimistic about the economy in 2026. Mind you, this was before we started bombing Iran. But of course, look, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future, as said Yogi Berra. And this is what you see. You just can't take these guys at all seriously. Now, of course, the other side of it is no matter how bad the news has been, the stock market keeps going up and up and up. We understand, of course, that it's the range of tech guys driving the show, as the case may be, plus a bunch of startups wrapped around this cryptocurrency nonsense. Hey, look, is it a real estate? Is it a stock market bubble? Of course it is. It's not even an argument. Second highest PE ratio in the stock markets ever coming into 2026. Second highest, the only time it's been higher was in 1999, and we know what happened over the next 2 years. So yes, it's a stock market bubble. But saying it's a stock market bubble, even by itself, doesn't mean, wow, I'm raising a red flag and this economy's heading for another depression. Because look, we had that stock market bubble in 1999. Does anybody remember the 2001 tech recession? Kind of not, because it was barely a recession. And by the way, out here in the Inland Empire, you didn't even notice it. Went right past you, like a ship in the night. You wouldn't even notice it happened. So stock market bubbles by themselves are not that dangerous for the economy. It all depends on how that stock market is connected to the rest of the economy, primarily through debt. And that's one of the reasons why the Great Recession was so bad. It wasn't the collapse in the stock market, it was all that bad debt, particularly in the mortgage markets, that created all the problem. Debt bubbles are way scarier than equity bubbles ever will be. Now, of course, you know, why are they happy out there? You know, I'm sorry, let me back up again. I'm still frazzled from my running around the highway this morning. You know, what I like to see, if you really want to be scared about Wall Street, be scared of this, which is that in 2025, Wall Street saw their highest bonuses ever. And that all by itself should scare you. After all, remember what Warren Buffett said, be fearful when others are greedy. When the stock market is looking this greedy, it's time for everybody in the room to be a little bit scared, because obviously they are up to some shenanigans. And the question, again, is how is it going to impact us here in the Inland Empire? Now, here's the big picture. First of all, coming into 2026, the economy was actually picking up speed. Business finances, still great. Household finances, still great. That will continue to promote growth. More importantly, inflation's cooled off, debt markets remain clean, and the result of that is the Federal Reserve has been able to back off. Throw that into the mix with the fact that we had the one big beautiful bill passed last year, which means an increased, expanding fiscal deficit, federal deficit. Well, you add it all up, we're having more stimulus being thrown at the economy now. For the first time in the last couple of years, all the stimulus needles are deep into the positive territory. All that tells me is that 2026 actually should end up being a better year than 2025. And I mean that for real estate as well as for consumer spending and business investment and everything else. Things actually look pretty good right now. Now, all that said, does that mean things are great and we don't have to worry about the end of this expansion anytime in the near future? And the answer to that, of course, is absolutely not. Look, if you want to know when this expansion is going to come to the end, understand what causes expansions to come to an end, what causes recessions. And the answer is a big shock to the structure of aggregate demand. Some rapid decline in aggregate demand in some part of the economy is what triggers that vicious cycle that we refer to as a recession. How do you find where that shock's going to come from? Well, sometimes you can't. Like in the case of the pandemic, I mean, look, in mid-2019, nobody knew about COVID. And so you couldn't really see that one. But that said, most recessions you absolutely can see if you just know where to look. What you have to do is play a little game of spot the imbalance. Now, in this market, it's pretty obvious where the imbalance is. Go back to what I just said, the stock market bubble and this federal deficit. Now, in the short run, this may continue to feed our economy, particularly the one big beautiful bill. But we know, of course, you remember the old expression, if it's too good to last, it's not going to last. And that's exactly what this circumstance is. We are seeing an economy that's picking up speed on the basis of drivers that are simply not sustainable. And so the only question is when do the wheels come off this train? We don't know yet, is the answer. But we know the problems are starting to grow. And the answer may be sooner than anybody really wants to think about. When it comes to the end of this presentation, we'll have a conversation about what that may look like. As for the Inland Empire, I get it. This is a horrible market to be a real estate agent in because there are no transactions. There is nothing to sell. But that's the key. The problem is there's nothing to sell. It's not a function of demand. It's a function of supply. There are still more demand than supply of housing out here at this particular point in time. And the reason for that is, of course, there's strong growth on what I call the intensive margin. You know, we like to talk about growth in terms of the number of new jobs, the number of new households. But growth on the intensive margin is, well, how much are people making? And while it is true we're not seeing a lot of growth on the extensive margin because of a lack of housing, we're seeing a lot of growth on the intensive margin, which is exactly what's lifting demand for housing in this particular economy. That is why there is so much demand. That is why home prices haven't fallen, despite the fact that mortgage rates jumped up to about 7%. But in the end, having more housing, fixing the budget deficit, making sure the collapse of the bubble doesn't have an impact on our broader economy, all of these things are completely solvable. They're very, very easy solutions. I mean, what are we going to do about the federal deficit? You raise taxes and cut spending. See how easy that is? But the problem is we can't have that conversation. The problem is that our narratives are so screwed up right now. Our political narratives, our social narratives are such a mess that we can't have the appropriate conversations about the right things. And there is the biggest problem of all. And I would argue in some ways the narrative reality gap is about as bad as it has ever been, and it probably is linked to this flood of information we get through all our fancy gadgets, which is relatively new to humanity. But one thing, though, I will tell you, is that while it may be particularly intense right now, this is nothing new. This is human beings at our core. The fact that we don't see the world in exactly the right way has been with us since the dawn of time. So there's nothing particularly extraordinary about our times, except for the fact that for some reason we think our times are extraordinary. Always keep that humility in mind. Now, I got a lot to go through, too many slides. There will be a QR code at the end. You can get it from Lance, you can get it from me. Either way, you'll get a copy of these slides. I'm going to buzz through stuff so we have time for Q&A at the end of this thing before I jump in Blaine's car. Blaine, raise your hand. Blaine is one of my new development folks at Beacon Economics. You can turn around, he's waving his hand there. He's going to drive me back to my car and help me wire up my muffler so I can get to the garage, which is very kind of him. But he lives out here. He's actually my new development guy. He is a resident of the Inland Empire, and I wanted him to come out today to meet all of you, just to introduce him to you as we move forward. He can also help you get a copy of the slides. All right. So, as noted, 2025, not a great year, but not a bad year. About 2.2% growth overall, a little bit slower than 2024. Now, of course, this doesn't fit any picture you've heard out there. The Democrats will tell you 2024 was great and 2025 was the worst year ever. The Republicans will tell you 2025 was the best year ever and 2024 was a horrible mess. And of course, they're all wrong because the political narratives are completely off base from what's going on. The economy did slow down, but what's interesting is not consumer spending. Consumer spending continues to add about 2% to growth. It's not business investment. Business investment continued to add about 0.5% to growth. Net exports were a little bit of a negative, but they were in 24 as well. In fact, the only difference between last year and this year was a big slowdown in public spending, and that, of course, had to do with the Doge cuts at the start of last year and the government shutdown at the end of last year. So it was completely kind of a government sort of thing. Otherwise, the year looked almost exactly the same. And as noted, coming into this particular year, forecasters have been more optimistic about the economy and raising their growth forecasts, as well as reducing the probability of recession this particular year. In the middle of all this is consumer spending. And consumer spending, the highest it's ever been. In real inflation-adjusted terms, never have Americans consumed so much as they are right now. What's driving the spending show? It's not spending on food, it's not spending on housing. Actually, the biggest increases in nominal spending for American consumers is healthcare and insurance. So it's really on the service side of the economy where most new dollars are going at this particular point in time. Now, why wouldn't people be consuming a record amount? After all, real inflation-adjusted incomes are at an all-time high level. Real inflation-adjusted net worth is at an all-time high level. Despite all those negative headlines, never has America been as prosperous, at least on average, and I'll come back to that in just a second, at least on average, never has America been as prosperous as it is right now. Now, I get it. Tourism's a little flat in California. We're not seeing a lot of people coming to our state. But understand, it's not because they don't want to come to California. It's just that they'd rather go overseas. Again, go back to this idea of record income, record net wealth. Well, you're also seeing it in terms of a record spending on foreign travel. Americans are having the time of their lives. They're running all over the world at this particular point in time, which is why things are a little bit flat here right now. But nevertheless, still some decent data out there. Inland Empire hotels are a little bit soft at the moment, but on Ontario Airport, actually a record busy at this particular point in time. Again, maybe not so much people flying here, but obviously people in the Inland Empire seem to be really happy to get on planes and go to all sorts of wonderful, wonderful places at this point in time. If you're worried about more visitors, I got good news for you. This year we got FIFA. In a couple of years we got the Olympics. A lot of people are going to be coming to California. I just hope we're ready to impress upon them what a wonderful place we live and how they should be coming back to visit in a couple of years. Now, of course, it isn't just the rest of the nation that has record incomes. Here in California, we also have a record high level of incomes. This is median household income in the state right now, which just passed $100,000 in 2024 in most recent data. That means household incomes, by the way, in California are about 25% higher than they are in the nation overall at this particular point in time. My pants keep falling down. I'm okay now. There we go. The good news on this particular front is, I'm sorry, keep going on this one. If you look across the nation, there are 3,200 counties in the United States. No fewer than 15 of those counties that are the highest income, or the top 100 in terms of income in the nation, are here in California. So we're by far and away the highest income community out there. And while the Inland Empire, while Riverside County is not the highest income part of the state, nevertheless, even here, some really, really good data. In the Inland Empire right now, median household incomes just crossed $90,000. And to give you a sense of what it looks like here in Riverside and Orange and San Bernardino, just take a look at some of this data. This is Orange County, San Bernardino, and Riverside cities. Top of the list in terms of cities is Irvine, not as big surprise, a median household income of $146,000. Huntington after that, $115,000. But then you have Temecula and Murrieta, which have almost the same median household income as Huntington does. And that, by the way, that's higher than Orange, Fullerton, Anaheim, Costa Mesa. West Riverside is actually economically healthier than East Orange County at this particular point in time. Some very, very strong numbers on that particular front. And even out here in Moreno Valley, yes, one of the lowest income areas at $80,000, but that's still above national average, and it's up 23% over the course of the last 5 years. State spending trends are still high. Seems odd considering that taxable sales haven't been growing. But the reason taxable sales haven't been growing is because taxable sales are only charged on a small subset of goods. And by the way, that subset of goods have seen basically prices start to fall over the course of the last couple of years, even as people are consuming more and more services. And that's why the taxable sales numbers look flat, despite the fact that real overall consumer spending continues to rise. And of course, because of the prevalence of warehouses out here, the Inland Empire has seen a lot more in the way of taxable sales growth than places west to you. Now, of course, the standard answer you'll hear to all this from the various sorts of miserabilists out there is that while this all looks well and good, you're missing the fact that it's because the top 20% are doing great and the other 80% can't even feed themselves. We live in the new Gilded Age where the tech titans are driving everything and the other 80% are being left in the dust. And Mr. Zandy, just the last couple of months, put this nonsense out. He put a graph out based on Moody's research, which we never get to see, where he claims that the top 20% of Americans are consuming 60% of everything. That's an all-time high, according to Mr. Zandy. Now, I got to tell you, I saw this graph and I went, that doesn't seem right to me. I mean, don't get me wrong, I get it. The top 20% are pretty well off. But 60% of everything? That's a pretty enormous number. And I sat down and I tried to replicate this, and I couldn't do it. And the reason is, this is total bullshit. He made it up. He totally made it up. Look, if you look at average household income over the course of the last decade, the top 5%, yeah, about a 31% increase in income. The bottom 80%, about 22% or 23%. That's not a K-shaped recovery. Everybody is seeing their incomes going up, not just the rich. And by the way, we do have some data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. According to their data, now it's not complete, but it's a pretty good set. It's about 65% of all spending. According to them, the top 20% have been consuming a little less than 40% of everything forever. And by the way, even the income data, the income share going to the top 20% of Americans is only 50%. And we know that richer Americans save more than poorer Americans. So there's no possible way that the top 20% consume 60% of everything. You just can't. It's complete garbage. And yet it's all over the news. Everybody's talking about it. In fact, even when you look out here, look, wages have been rising in the Inland Empire, weekly wages faster than in Orange County, substantially. Women have been seeing more earnings growth than men. Low-skilled folks have seen more earnings growth than high-skilled folks over the course of the last 5 years. None of this says the rich are getting richer. And if you look out here in the Inland Empire, a very similar sort of picture. In the Inland Empire, those who are lower skilled have seen fairly good increases in their earnings. There's no K-shaped recovery. This is nonsense. And what about Gen Z? This is one of my favorite headlines over the course of the last few months. This woman named Susie Welch, who works at NYU. By the way, if you see anything that comes from NYU or Stanford or a labor center, you could assume it's wrong, okay? I've just never seen such propaganda coming out of universities at this point in time. But Susie Welch recently says, Gen Z millennials are burnt out because older generations worked just as hard, but they had hope. They had hope. Really? I mean, this is what we feed our kids today? They had hope? Right off the bat, the real article you should look at this is in The Economist, which points out that, guess what? Gen Z is actually unprecedentedly rich. In fact, for their age, Gen Z is making more money than any previous cohort of people at that age. And they don't work nearly as hard. They just don't. But again, this is our world, just nonsense. Their net worth is fine as well. No, Gen Z is not falling behind. And of course, all of this is wrong because it's based on gross income. Look, there's another reason why you cannot possibly say we live in a new Gilded Age. Because in the last Gilded Age, a little over 100 years ago, you know what they didn't have? They didn't have Social Security. They didn't have Medicare. They didn't have Medicaid. They didn't have food stamps. They didn't have Section 8 housing vouchers. None of that existed. You kind of have to count that. You kind of have to count it, because get this, 20% of household income in the United States, 20% comes directly from the federal government in the form of a transfer. 1 out of $5 of American income comes directly from the federal government in the form of a transfer. $4.4 trillion a year. You cannot talk about inequality without talking about this. In fact, it turns out that once you account for taxes paid and benefits received, the 2 quintiles of American households that have done the best over the course of the last 15 years are the top quintile, because they've gotten all sorts of tax cuts, and the bottom quintile, because they've seen all sorts of benefit increases. So it's the top and the bottom who've been best off. That, by the way, that goes to the strength of our apartment markets right now. Now, you might argue, wait a minute, how can you cut taxes and increase spending? Oh yeah, $2 trillion a year in federal borrowing. We'll come back to that. But in the end, of course, it's not what they tell you. Everybody's panicked about poverty. You hear it all the time. Well, what's the poverty rate? Well, the official poverty rate is at 11%. But again, this doesn't include $4.4 trillion of transfers. If you include those, the actual poverty rate is 0.5%. 0.5%. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have a problem. We do have a problem, but it's not the problem they tell you about. It's not the, oh, we need rent control. Oh, we need minimum wages. Oh, we need to increase health benefits for low-income families. The real question is, why do so many families still need government support to not live in poverty? And that's the old, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime argument. It's about education. This is the story. In fact, if you ask what puts people in poverty, it's, again, not a lack of rent control or low minimum wage. It's not getting enough education, being a single parent, and not having a full-time job. Not complicated. Get them educated, get them a full-time job. When you have kids, have two parents. And you will avoid most poverty in the United States. As for California, our poverty rate, our official poverty rate, is below 12%. And no, it's nowhere close to Louisiana. That's total nonsense. I wouldn't even get into the supplemental poverty rate and how broken it is. I also know it's not just a low poverty rate. Black and Hispanic households have seen more income growth than the average. So those households who have been economically behind are starting to catch up a bit. Now, I'm not saying inequality is no longer a problem, but I am saying the trends are moving in the right direction, and wouldn't it be nice if we could acknowledge that for once, right? And of course, again, here in the Inland Empire, you see, again, those lower skilled folks catching up. In fact, if you look at the distribution of income in the Inland Empire, so interesting. Here's Orange County, and you can see an increase in the 150K range, decrease in the 75 range. But come over here to Riverside. Very similar sort of picture. 11 percentage point increase. The number of folks earning over 150K a year in this part of the world has grown from 20% to 31% in the last 5 years. Huge increase in high-income households. Whereas, at the other side of it, families making below 75K has dropped a full 11 percentage points. So it's not a barbell economy. Everybody's moving to the right. People are doing better. Of course, share of the population of credit scores down. Poverty rates locally are down as well. Of course, you might say, but none of this means anything because we have an affordability crisis, right? It's so expensive. The cost of living is so high here in California that none of these nominal numbers say anything to me. Dan Walters, about every 2 weeks, has to write another article. Sky-high living costs, highest poverty rate in the nation. Well, how expensive is California, right? How expensive is it? Well, we don't have to guess. We have the data. The Bureau of Economic Analysis does something called the regional price parity, where they look at what the increase in your nominal income would have to be to have a roughly equivalent quality of life. California is about 12.5% more expensive than the nation. You might say, well, that's kind of low, isn't it? Just 12.5%? Well, a couple of things here. It includes San Francisco and Fresno, so it's a big mix. The other part of it is you might say, well, but housing's so expensive. And that's true. Housing is about 58% more expensive than the rest of the nation. But that said, because housing is more expensive here, what consumers do is we consume a little less housing, which is more expensive, and we consume a little bit more of everything else, which is about the same price. It's called the relative price effect. This is why in California you tend to live in a small house and have a nice car, where if you were living in Indiana, you'd have a beautiful giant house, and you probably drive an older car, all right? That's the choices people make. Here in Riverside, by the way, in the Inland Empire, the overall metric is about 5%. Yes, housing is about 30% more expensive, but the overall cost of living out here is just about 5% more expensive than the nation. Again, this is not me making this up. This is the Bureau of Economic Analysis coming up with this data. Once you account for that, by the way, it turns out that even accounting for affordability, people in the Riverside County earn more money than the rest of the nation. So this this place you live in, you work in, offers a higher quality of life than most of the rest of the United States. That's pretty good. It's not what you hear all the time. Simple as that. And of course, we were talking about affordability, talking about prices. Where's inflation right now? Well, inflation's fine. For the last 3 years, it's been 2.7%. And I know Fed targets 2%, but let me explain something to you. When they say target is 2%, there's a lot of fungibility in those numbers. There's a lot of error. We don't measure it very well. Thank you. It's hot as hell in here. I appreciate that. Oh, you're trying to kill me. But over the last 3 years, about 2.7%, which is absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. There's nothing particularly scary in that number. And by the way, the biggest increases in prices, yet again, it's housing, it's insurance, it's financial services, it's restaurants and hotels. So it's not what they tell you, right? And what about food prices? The food crisis we have right now. Every time we turn around, we hear about the food crisis because, well, it is true, food prices have gone up a little bit more than the average. But that doesn't mean we have a food crisis, particularly since real incomes have been going up. In fact, over here on the right-hand side, this is the food share of total consumer spending. In 1976, American households, about 13% of their consumption basket went to buying food out of a supermarket. 13%. The last reading, 6%, the lowest it has ever been. In fact, over the last year, for the first time ever, Americans are now spending more money at restaurants than they do at food out of supermarkets. Honey, food's so expensive, we have to eat out again tonight. Really, this is the shit people make up. It's hard to believe. And let's not forget that 42 million Americans get food stamps. We found this out during the closures last year, the shutdown of the government. 42 million Americans. Wow. That's like 15% of Americans get food stamps. The poverty rate's 11%. Who's getting food stamps? Lance is. We know Lance is getting food stamps. He knows how to work the system, right? 42 million people. Of course, you turn around and you just keep seeing horror stories. America's hunger crisis is growing. We're choosing to look away. Our hunger crisis. Really? Why? Why do people say stuff like this when it's so obviously false? Well, I have my own new expression. Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you'll lose your nonprofit's funding grant. Think about it. Folks, there is a poverty industrial complex in this nation. There's a lot of folks out there who make their living off of moving public money around. And they don't want to help those people any more than a pharmaceutical company wants to take you off a chronic pill, a pill for a chronic condition, and give you a cure. All right? So you got to be really careful about this stuff. You can't just buy all this. What about the tariffs? I thought the tariffs drove prices up through the roof. I said this to you last year. Tariffs didn't matter. They didn't matter at all. Why? Because we're not an import-sensitive country. Our entire trade flow as a percent of our GDP is 26%. That's nothing from a global standpoint. UK is 64%. South Korea is 86%. Singapore is 321%. Imports and exports are 300% of the Singaporean economy. These are nations that are trade dependent. We are not. If you had slapped a 20% tariff on everything, it would have been a $600 billion tax on a $30 trillion economy. Irrelevant. And of course, it never got close to that because we kept handing out exemptions. And most of the stuff from Canada and Mexico didn't have any tariffs because under USMCA, as long as you meet local sourcing, you can't put a tariff on it. Now, all this went away, of course, right? We know the Supreme Court blew it all up. He could no longer do this. We got $180 billion in taxes, in tariff taxes last year, which we're probably going to have to pay back. By the way, of that $180 billion, how much was actually paid for by consumers? I did a little analysis. It's about $36 billion is what I came up with. Again, $21 trillion of spending. We paid $36 billion more because of the tariffs. You can't even see it. But again, it's all gone. He's talking about this 10% thing. But this is probably also illegal, and it's worth noting it's only good for 150 days. The best he could do with this is $50 billion, which won't even be enough to pay back the $180 billion from last year. And And of course, what about the renegotiations of the USMCA? This is just a catch-up. Nothing can change in the USMCA unless it goes through Congress. So trust me when I say the Canadians and Mexicans are saying, hey, whatever we want to do on USMCA, can we wait till after November? Because they're just going to wait for the midterms, because at that point in time, the Trump administration almost assuredly is going to lose in the midterms. They're not going to have any more negotiating power. For me, believe it or not, I know this sounds weird, I'm actually a little worried about the tariffs going away. And I know, you say, wait a minute, tariffs are terrible. They are. But that being said, all taxes are bad at some level. All taxes are distortionary. But we still need taxes because we need government, because we need roads, and we need police, and we need schools, and that gets paid through taxes. So you have to trade off a little bit of distortion for revenue. That's how the world works. And what this tells me is we had a $2 trillion deficit this year, coming into this year, roughly $2 trillion we could have expected. But now we got to pay back $180 billion. We might get $50 billion. But you can see where this goes. We just lost $260 billion because the tariffs are no longer going to be in place. So actually, this is probably, then throwing the war on Iran, we just went very quickly from a $2 trillion deficit this year to probably about $2.35 trillion. Very quickly. So it's actually making the deficit situation that much worse. Regardless, because of the slowdown in inflation, the Fed's been able to back off. They've been cutting the federal funds rate. Way more importantly, and I want everybody in the room to hear me out on this one. You're in real estate. People care about mortgage rates. Everybody gets excited when they move the federal fund rate because they go, oh, that's going to bring mortgage rates down. And the answer is, no, it's not. The federal funds rate is an overnight rate between banks. The mortgage rate is a completely different auction, which is typically linked to the 10-year bond. Now, they are correlated. They're correlated because typically the markets look to the federal funds rate not as a driver, but as a predictor. If you're cutting the federal funds rate, you're going to probably do that more in the future. Hence, it's likely that the 10-year bond is going to come down. Hence, you'll see a little more fluff move into the bond market. Rates will come down, the bond market rallies a little bit. But that's a signaling mechanism. It's not a guarantee. It's not a lever point, okay? So don't think that this is necessarily the kind of thing to be paying attention to. Way more important is quantitative easing and quantitative tightening. The activity the Federal Reserve engages in terms of their balance sheet. If they're quantitative easing, they're printing money, giving it to the government, and getting back treasuries. That expands the money supply, and that brings interest rates down. And of course, it also makes credit more available. When they quantitative tighten, they're selling bonds off the balance sheet, they're bringing cash in the Federal Reserve, and they're flushing it down the toilet. That shrinks the money supply, which drives interest rates up and makes credit less available. When you think about the last couple of years where credit's been hard to get, particularly in the commercial side, a lot of that had to do with the fact that the Federal Reserve was shrinking their balance sheet. They were involved in quantitative tightening. Well, that quantitative tightening actions has almost come to a halt. And that's exactly why, well, interest rates have been drifting down. And of course, it's been easier to get mortgage loans at this particular point in time. So actually, the mortgage market is really starting to pick up. There's a lot of activity. The mortgage rates, what's the mortgages today? 6%? 6%. It's good. Take advantage of it, because trust me, this is what they call this is a dead cat bounce, as they say, okay? It may go down, but it's going to come up again. The only question is when. I'd be telling your folks, if you're thinking about it, you might want to get in while the getting's good. By the way, the multifamily lending market, I know you're involved in this as well. Credit's also easier to get here. And the commercial markets have settled out. There's a little increase in transactions. Cap rates are no longer rising at this particular point in time. So even here, you're seeing better numbers. Now, everything I just told you is good, and you'll never see it in the headlines. Gallup just came out with the anticipated life. What is your anticipated life over the next 5 years? And it's slumped to an all-time low level in the United States. 7 out of 10 parents still think their kids are going to have a worse quality of life than they are. 7 out of 10 college students think the country's on the wrong track. And I think I showed this to you last fall. This graph, for me, so perfectly captures what's going on in our nation. The top line, they asked a whole bunch of folks at the Federal Reserve, how are you doing financially? The top line is the percentage of people who say, I'm doing okay or living comfortably. 2017, 74% said I'm doing okay or living comfortably. 2024, 73%. That's the same number. Now, people are better off, but we're inherently unsatisfied. So for me, that's exactly what I would expect. The lower lines are where it gets way more interesting. This is where they ask, how is your local economy doing and how's the national economy doing? This is the percent who said good or excellent. Notice how this number is falling. In other words, the average American thinks they're doing just fine, but the average American thinks the average American's doing terrible. Doesn't work like that, all right? 90% of parents think their kids are above average. Doesn't work like that. Lance has 2 sons. Statistically, one is a dumbass. There you go, Drake, back there. Owning it, owning it. But that's the world we live in, right? Look, business investment is up. Corporate profits are up. Proprietor profits are up. Manufacturing's doing well. Manufacturing's at an all-time high level. Manufacturing profits at an all-time high level. The only problem with manufacturing is they're not using people. They're using productivity growth to drive output and profits. Don't use labor as a metric of output. It's not a very good metric. You got to look at both sides of the equation. Manufacturing is doing well. Trade flows, despite the tariffs, pretty good. Continue to move up through the various ports, LA, International, Long Beach, Otay Mesa, Calexico. All this, continue to see movement out there. Freight indices, nice and stable, no collapse there. The goods market is still moving across the United States right now. Well, what about these vacancy rates? Yeah. Big vacancy rates in industrial space, but only because they overbuilt. It's not a demand problem, it's a supply problem. They built too much of this stuff, and now they got to catch up. And they will. I'm not worried about it. Look, logistics employment peaked, and it's kind of flat in the Inland Empire right now, way above where it was. Of course it was going to give back a few. It got ahead of itself. Not a surprise. But this is still a powerful logistics place, as the case may be. And I like to look at occupied stock. What's interesting is you have the highest vacancy rates, but occupied stock of industrial continues to rise in the Inland Empire. It's drifting down in LA and Orange County. Again, that tells you where the strong market is. There's just some excess space kicking around out here. Now, of course, people aren't really appreciating this. We all know that AB 98 passed about a year and a half ago. What is AB 98? It's the we no longer want industrial real estate rule. And it's not just this, of course. You could just look across all the things that are going on where we have all sorts of local rules and local moratoriums, and cities are shooting things down in their planning commission or in City Hall. Everybody's against industrial. Why? Oh, the only thing you get is air pollution and traffic and a bunch of crappy jobs. I've never in my life. Are you kidding me? So this is my point. We have a narrative, and the narrative drives policy, even though the narrative is completely wrong at every level. You know, I've been wanting to study this for a while. In fact, I recently started doing some work with NAIOP SoCal, and NAIOP IE, they're part of it as well, where we're looking at industrial real estate. What is this ecosystem? What babies are we throwing out with this bathwater? Because guess what? Not all industrial is just a giant warehouse with pallets. In fact, this warehouse behind us here, we call it a warehouse. It's not. It's one of the most advanced manufacturing distribution centers in the world, right? This is not chump change. This is high technology. And you want to throw this out? Why? On what basis? So we started pulling some stuff together. In fact, working with some of the county data. And by the way, you can't show this. This is preliminary. You're not going to get this. And turn off those cameras now. But we're doing some work with NAIOP, and I just presented some of this at NAIOP a couple days ago. So interesting. You look at Riverside County, what's in warehouses? Okay, about a third of logistics jobs. But guess what? 20% are manufacturing. And there's wholesale, there's construction, there's real estate, there's professional jobs. This is an enormous ecosystem. It's not one thing. In fact, when we looked at it, really simply, we're doing a little bit of economic impact analysis. It turns out close to 20% of economic activity in Southern California starts in a warehouse, starts in an industrial zone. You can't just walk away. You can't throw this away. This is way too important, right? And these are good-paying jobs. Riverside County, $70,000 for a manufacturing job. Wholesale is an $80,000 job. These are above average. So we have to change this narrative This is a centerpiece of economic development, not a stain on it. Now, with all this good news, why are labor markets flat? Well, look, they are flat, but the job openings rate is still relatively high, and it's still decent for healthcare and professional business services. And when you look at unemployment rate, it's drifted up a little bit, but it's not that people are getting laid off. There's almost no layoffs right now. There's been no claims for unemployment insurance. Every time I turn around, there's another horror story about, every coder in California being laid off simultaneously. Where's the unemployment insurance? If they are getting laid off, they're getting another job relatively quickly. In fact, the real problem out there is, yes, labor markets, companies aren't hiring a lot because they're nervous. They overhired a few years ago. The real issue is a lack of labor force. Labor force growth peaked in the early 80s at about 2.5%. And that's because we were having lots of kids back then. And then since that point in time, we've had fewer and fewer kids. And as a result of that, our natural increase has gone basically almost to zero. The result of that, of course, is this nation is becoming more and more dependent on immigrants. And how dependent are we? In the last 15 years, we've added about 17 million people to the U.S. labor force. Over half those folks were born overseas. Now, I get it. We want these people to come here in a nice, orderly way. We don't want them running over the border or overstaying their tourist visa. We need a controlled system for who they are, what their motives are. And the way to do that is to fix our legal immigration system, which is something we've absolutely failed to do. As a result of that, a couple of years ago, when we had an enormous number of job openings and no one to hire, people came here. And yes, they came here in an undocumented sort of way. And for the most part, I'm really glad they did. But of course, we also know, yet again, it was one of the reasons why Trump got elected, because of the general frustration around this particular issue. And now you saw what happened in downtown LA. You saw what happened in Minneapolis. People are no longer coming here. And of course, the administration is trumpeting this as a great thing. This worries me. We need people. Simple as that. Now again, fix the legal system. Not complicated, but our narratives are so broke. What about AI then? Again, the Luddites coming to get you. They're coming to take your job. I had some guy ranting and raving, like spit coming out of his mouth. Oh, every tech company's going to lay off 80% of their people. Oh, okay. How many times have we heard this? March of Machines Make Idle Hands, 1928. The Automation Jobless, 1961. Automation Rethink Employment, 1964. The New Jobless Future, 1984. The End of Work, 2003. Please, will someone get a machine to do my job so I don't have to work anymore? Please? Because they're failing miserably. And it's not going to cause a job apocalypse. In fact, just take a close look. They're overselling AI. I get it. It's really impressive. It's really interesting. It's really good at what it does. Problem is, it doesn't do nearly as much as we think it does. It's kind of like, Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man. It's really good at counting cards. Everything else kind of useless. And that's the key. Look, if anything, we should be looking to AI as the great hope. Inasmuch as we need productivity growth. If we can't have labor force growth, we need productivity growth. And what's interesting is we had a huge surge of IT-related productivity growth in the beginning part of this century because of the internet and all this wonderful new technology, communication technology, the creation of Wi-Fi and these incredible networks. And then it died. It died right about 2007 or 8. Does anybody want to know why productivity growth died here? That was because of the next phase of information technology, and that, of course, would be smartphones and social media, which is the antithesis of productivity growth. And when you think about AI, I think about AI as a thing that can make us more productive, which will be a lift for productivity growth, which will help us grow the economy more. But we can also think about that AI, the AI that your teenager's dating, the AI that YouTube uses to take your weird uncle and drag him down the rabbit hole till he thinks that he's wearing an aluminum hat, and he's screaming at you that AI is going to take 80% of our jobs, and the Democrats eat children. This is the world we live in, right? Which is it going to be? As for California, yeah, we don't have a lot of job growth either, but I already talked about this. So what? Incomes are going up. Here in the Inland Empire, things are a little bit better, but here, job growth is about 0% over the course of the last year, at least according to the official numbers. This is the industry employment. Some other folks did a big conference out here. They went on and on and on about employment. Don't even look at it. We're going to get a giant revision in April. If you hadn't figured it out, all our surveys are busted right now. I don't really know what's going on out there. I'll tell you in April, okay? That's when we get the revisions. That said, I still know the problem is not a function of labor demand, it's labor supply, because our population hasn't been growing. Labor force, not growing nearly enough. Since February 2020, United States, about 4.2% growth. Phoenix, 12% growth. Inland Empire, 8% growth, pretty good. But of course, Orange County, 0.8% growth. And therein lies the rub. It's, again, a lack of workers in this particular place. Now, why is the population not growing? Because people are fleeing California. I can't even tell you how many times. I had a debate with a guy, a really smart guy, who I really respect for the most part. And I was having this debate with him because he was telling me that people are fleeing California because of high taxes and regulations. And I said, I get it, but they're fleeing. Yeah, they're fleeing. I said, okay, do we have a housing problem? Yeah. What's our housing problem? We have a housing shortage. Stop. How can we have a housing shortage when people are fleeing because of taxes and regulation? How do those two things fit together? Well, I just know people are leaving because of taxes, because somebody told me. Okay. Look, people do leave. They leave for all sorts of reasons. But remember, everybody who leaves, someone wants to come. And the question isn't how many people are leaving, it's what the net amount is. And by the way, over the last couple of years, California's averaged about 600,000 people leaving and about 400,000 people coming in. That has been the blend. All right? So people are still coming here. And no, we have no vacancies. Our problem is we're doing so well, we're spreading out. Because we're spreading out, we need more housing, and we won't build housing. So we can't even build enough housing for local demand, much less build enough housing to allow people to live here. And that's just as true here in the Inland Empire as every place else. Our real problem is the lack of housing. We just won't build it. Same thing here in the Inland Empire. Look, better numbers here. You're still building 15,000 permits per year, but you need 30,000 permits per year. And we're just not able to increase the production. Why? Well, the answer is why not? I mean, there's 1,000 reasons. Zoning restrictions, permitting fees, slow, confused permitting, excessive litigation, excessive local regulations, unmandated expense. I can go on and on and on and on and on. And the thing that's so frustrating to me is how everybody seems to want to focus on one of the things and blow up, and then we try to fix that one thing, and even then, we can't even fix one thing. Did anybody see the CEQA reform we had last year? The so-called CEQA reform? Did you look at the small print? It was abysmal. It was hideous. It was incredibly limited where the reform took place. Only infill development, only buildings under 70 feet, only this, only that, only this. And then it came with a whole bunch of poison pills. In the end, I look at that CEQA reform, it's hard for me to say we're actually ahead of the game because of that. Why? Because deep down inside, while all of our political leaders say they know we need more housing, most of them are not willing to walk into that city council meeting and look at the NIMBYs who are screaming in their face, telling you you're destroying my world, my life, my neighborhood. Right? They don't want to do that. And that's why we don't get serious about truly fixing this stuff. It's as simple as that. And just last year, RAND did an amazing study where they looked at cost of building across the United States. It costs twice as much to build an apartment building in California as it does in Texas. Twice as much. By the way, the concrete costs the same, wood costs the same, the Caterpillar machine costs the same, the nails cost the same. It's our regulations, it's our fees, it's our permits, it's our labor laws. This is what causes it to be so expensive. There's nothing fundamental about California. This is our choice. And of course, we can also talk about market liquidity. You know, one of the things I try to get across to folks, particularly in the real estate world, is the message you need to tell state government is not, oh, every time someone sells a house, it's 9 jobs created. Because they don't care about your jobs. They don't care about you. Every time you use that California Association of Realtor nonsense. Every time they sell a house, you create 9 jobs. Their eyes roll. So I should make everybody move just so you can have a job? It doesn't make any sense. But that's not the point. The point of what you do of a liquid real estate market is to take the real estate we do have and use it effectively. We have grandmas living in a 5-bedroom house because they can't afford to sell it. And then we have families with 4 kids living in a 2-bedroom apartment because they can't find any place to move to. People move, kids come, kids go, jobs change. We need liquidity in our markets to promote the efficient use of our existing housing stock. And again, we seem to go out of our way to make the housing market as illiquid as possible. Crazy rules, crazy regulations, Prop 13, the fact that you can't port your mortgage rate from one property to another. And now, of course, this nonsense of these mansion taxes, which all sorts of cities are fond of. That's exactly the same thing in apartments. We need a liquid market. You shouldn't have rent control. Rent control ties people to their property. You want people to be able to move. I need a bigger place. I have a new kid. My kid moved out. I need a smaller place. I got a new job over there. I want him to move close to where I work. We have to promote liquidity. That's why you're valuable. That's the message you need to get across. Again, we're working with some association groups. We're working with the MLS on this right now to help them improve the messaging on this particular front. There's a better story to tell. But to tell that better story, you have to be involved in it. Again, population needs to grow faster out here, and that means more housing supply. You do have more job growth. 85% of all job growth in the state is from Sacramento, Central Valley, and the Inland Empire, because this is where there's population growth. There's housing supply growth. But even here, it's not enough. Things are slowing down. Take a look at the Inland Empire. And according to this data, over the course of the last year, about 1.4% labor force growth could be, should be higher. But it's a function, of course, of expanding the housing supply. Now, housing. Where's that at? And Lance gave a little update on this. I'm going to back up some of that stuff. Look, everybody thinks the housing is the worst affordability has ever been. Even Trump is back against the wall because of quote-unquote housing affordability. But housing affordability isn't that bad, okay? The real thing here, of course, is one of the optics that we're dealing with is that decade after the Great Recession saw some of the most affordable housing ever. From 2011 to 2019, never has housing been more affordable in the United States because of low interest rates. Now, the reason for that was there was low demand because idiots like Zanny were running around telling everybody housing was unaffordable. Now, pandemic hit, they threw all the money at the economy, inflation kicked in, and suddenly rates dropped up. And yeah, affordability doesn't look too good right now. It looks like it did right before the Great Recession. By the way, before the Great Recession, nobody had any problem buying houses. So it's not that bad. And the other thing to keep in mind here, you know, you say affordability right now kind of looks like it did back in the 1980s, but even that's a false metric because this assumes a house today is the same as a house in the 1980s. It's not. A house in the 1980s, 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, probably didn't have air conditioning, unfinished basement, right? Today, these things are larger. There's more bathrooms, there's more closet space, much better constructed. It's not the same buy at all. In the end, the problem in housing is that we don't have enough of it because we haven't built enough because of all those bad narratives and because demand for it is increasing so much right now. Now, it's hard for builders to build. It's hard for you to buy and sell homes. There's a lack of liquidity in the market because, of course, of the Federal Reserve and its poor policy choices. Look, it's not complicated. Used to be you build at the top to supply at the bottom, and again, it's that market liquidity, what we call what's the term they use in housing economics? Whatever. Anyway, filtering. It's called the filtering model. But now, of course, builders have to supply directly to where the demand is because people aren't selling. And they're not selling because all these people have these 3% mortgages. Not complicated. This is what's limiting people from moving. You're not going to move except for under the most extreme circumstances. And that's exactly what's holding things back. There's no home sales. The US MBA purchase index still incredibly flat at this particular point in time. Houses sold here in the Inland Empire. You saw this. Lance just showed it to you. The difference between my data and his data is my data is seasonally adjusted, which means you can read it. Drake and I had a conversation. We're going to talk to you guys about fixing your data. National level, nothing to buy at this particular point in time. Again, inventories, they went up briefly, but they're starting to sag back down again. They're still below where they were back in 2018, 2019, as the case may be. And that's why home prices won't fall, because supply and demand is still beating it, keeping those home prices high at this particular point in time. Median days in the market, a little bit of an increase, has sagged coming into this year. Houses sold above lifting prices, there was a little bit of a surge in demand, but it's dropped down again. Like, I'm not kidding you. There's no signs that this market's about to come out of the starting gate and you're going to have a great year in front of you. What I can tell you, again, is you got to get people to understand that if you are going to move, now might be a good time to do it, because interest rates are probably going to go up from here. Now, does that mean we have an affordability crisis? And again, the answer is no. Because high prices are not a function of people overbuying. High prices are a function of the fact that the group of people who are able to buy is so small, they tend to be relatively high income. Again, remember what prices represent. Prices represent the equilibrium point between supply and demand. You remember what your econ professor told you all those days ago? When I see high prices, I don't see someone being taken advantage of. What I see is the fact that there's so few units available to sell that the people who get a chance to buy them are very high income. Simple as that. And that's why median owner cost as a percent of household income is actually considerably lower in 2024 than it was a decade ago. We actually pulled some data on first-time buyers, and it's so interesting. In 2013, your first-time buyer, a new home buyer, someone who just bought a home, lived in that house for the last 2 years, spent about 31% of their income on that housing unit. Today, despite higher interest rates and higher prices, it's only about 36%. It's just a little bit above. Because again, those high prices are reflecting the income of the buyer, the buying capacity of the buyer. It's not an affordability problem. And you can certainly see the data. Look at the recent buyers, big increases. All the increases in buyers in the Inland Empire are 150K up. Look at the income of these folks, right? And you can see how low their income ratios are. So again, it's rich buyers out there. Same thing on the apartment market. You know, apartment rents running about $2,100. They've been $2,100 for the last 3 years. Rents haven't gone up at all. That said, vacancy rates steady at about 7%, a little bit high out here, as the case may be. But again, it's not a function of affordability. In fact, I like to look at post-rent income, which is your income after you pay your rent. Turns out California post-rent incomes are higher than the rest of the nation. True here across different parts here as well. But of course, the story in city halls across the state, in Sacramento, is renters are being crushed, despite the fact that median rent income ratios have fallen over the last 10 years. I'm more worried about the big slowdown in apartments under construction. Again, the region needs more apartments, more single-family homes, and that's just a function of making things happen. Now, how does this stuff go crazy? How do our brains melt down? The answer there, of course, well, we've gone through this. You got to look at Daniel Kahneman talking about how we think emotionally, and Jonathan Haidt, how social issues create even more incentive to think emotionally rather than rationally. Throw in the chaos machine. Max Fisher's wonderful book talking about how the folks who run the internet have realized the way to keep you glued to your screen is to piss you off and scare you. And so they're constantly lobbing nonsense at you to get you to stay stuck to the screen. We don't think as much as we think we think. And it's not just little people. I still go back to 2020, where all those smart people with their fancy degrees in the Federal Reserve decided that the pandemic was going to cause a depression, despite the fact that no pandemic has ever caused a depression. That's completely wrong. That's not how the world works. But they made that choice, and away you go. Now, of course, that brought inflation, the higher interest rates, all that kind of good stuff. And what's interesting, of course, about that is, well, you know, why did Trump win the election in 2024? Well, again, it's not a mandate. Over half of all voters in the United States are not affiliated to either party. Neither party has a mandate, period. That doesn't exist. They vote on vibe. Ask yourself why one party won. Ask yourself, why are people mad at the other party? They were mad because of inflation. Who caused inflation? This guy. What's hysterical is Trump wants him gone. She wanted to send him flowers, a thank you note. And of course, cue the shifted narrative. Anybody who thinks the Consumer Sentiment Index reflects anything having to do with the economy, this should prove otherwise. This is consumer sentiment for Republicans and Democrats. Look what happened as soon as Trump was elected. Consumer sentiment for Democrats plummeted. Consumer sentiment for Republicans skyrocketed. Again, that tells you everything you need to know. This is not driven by economics. It's driven purely by narratives. And of course, now young people who have the best quality of life ever think capitalism has given them a raw deal. And in New York City, they just elected Mamdani, an avowed socialist. Now, it's interesting because I look at this guy, you know who I see? Trump. I do. Trump and Mamdani are the same person. They're populists. They're populists. They have risen to power on the basis of telling everybody that things are terrible. And they're going to fix it. They're populists. Simple as that. And that's the most amazing thing. We are seeing the rise of populism in the age of abundance. Never have we been better off. And yet, we can't appreciate it. In fact, I said this for a while, and then just the other day, I love this. Confused by Trump-Mamdani bromance? Not at all. They are, in many ways, the same creature. Simple as that. Look, the real issue here is we're over-consuming. We're overdoing it. I know that because of the trade deficit. The trade deficit grew to 6% of GDP before the Great Recession, and since then, it's never dropped below 3% of GDP. We are consuming way more than we're producing, and we've been doing it for decades. This is why our net investment position with the rest of the world has never been worse than it is right now. Why are we doing this? Government borrowing. Government borrowing. Right now, the federal government is on a record tier, and I get it. Economists have been talking on about federal deficits forever. It's boring. I've heard it all before. For 40 years, you guys can't shut up about this. This time, it's different. This is what I call the Keynesian cycle. This is the unemployment rate. This is the federal deficit. Bigger deficits go up. Notice how they move together. They should. Federal government is expected to intervene in the economy when things get rough, and that's what they do. But notice how the reaction to the cycle becomes more and more dramatic. This is basically the same size business cycle as this, much smaller reaction than that. And then in 2015, it blew up completely. In 2015, the deficit started increasing as a percent of the economy, no matter what was going on in the economy. It started under Obama, went through Trump 1, went through Biden 2, and now is continuing with the One Big Beautiful Bill under Trump 2. This is a truly bipartisan effort. Simple as that. And if you wanted to close it this year, you'd have to raise taxes in your average American family by $15,000. That's the rub. We all think we're a lot richer than we are. We think the savings rate's 4%. It's actually negative 5% once you include the government deficit. We think we have a 70% consumer debt to GDP. In fact, it's almost 180% once you include federal debt. That's our debt. So we have a vision of prosperity that doesn't actually exist. This can't go on. It's as simple as this. The question is what triggers the crisis? Could be the end of the Medicare Trust Fund, the Social Security Trust Fund, the Transportation Trust Fund. But my argument would be that it's going to start with a hike in interest rates. Because the thing to keep in mind, comes from the Center for the Responsible Fiscal Federal Budget. This is their estimate of what's going to happen in the future. This top line is what happens if the tariffs go away. And their argument is that the overall deficit percent of GDP is going to be drifting up. But the important thing in here is very simple. The important assumption in here you need to worry about is the fact that they are assuming that 10-year bonds rate will remain 4% forever. I have a problem with that. Why would you assume something as simplistic as 4% 10-year bonds forever? It's not how the world works. And of course, remember, the real issue here is we are dependent on massive flows of money pouring into this nation to buy equities, to buy cryptocurrency. That's the rub. When the bubble pops, the money stops coming here. When the money stops coming here, we have to start self-funding our deficit. And when that happens, interest rates go up. And when interest rates go up, that sets off a big increase in interest spending on the federal government, and that's what's going to set off the crisis. Now, this is not going to happen overnight. This is not going to be one morning, everything's fine, and the next morning, we're in the midst of a massive fiscal crisis. It's going to build up over time. But mark my words, when the bubble starts to sag, money stops coming here, the bond market's going to start to drop, the dollar's going to start to drop, and that's what's going to set off this inevitable chain of events where interest rates drift up, the deficit gets larger, there's more spending on interest, which means the deficit gets even larger, and then it's that feedback mechanism that gets us into an ugly place. Ultimately, what they are likely to do is go to the Federal Reserve and say, we need a little quantitative easing. And that's going to be inherently inflationary, and that's going to push up real interest rates. This is what we're talking about, okay? You could just see this where this is going. High real interest rates coming out of the high inflation 70s. They went down, 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 down. And suddenly, boom, right there. That's inflation part one, and you can see that thing start to go up. It's not complicated. Rates are going to go up because we're borrowing too much. It's a function of when, not if, but that when. Could be 2 years, could be 3 years, could be 4 years. We just don't know. You know, we came into this year with things looking weak. The stock market was down. Cryptocurrency was starting to break. The dollar was starting to drift down. And then we attacked Iran. How does this change everything? And the answer is, actually, it extends the runway. Now, I get it. What are you talking about? Oil prices are way up. Well, they are. They shot up to almost $100. By the way, they're already down to 86. Have you noticed that oil prices are dropping? Do you know why? Do you know who the world's largest producer of oil is? Us. We have massive reserves sitting in Texas. And by the way, you might want to keep in mind the fact that Venezuela, well, their oil market may open up relatively soon. In fact, given all that, honestly, if you look, ask the question, what's the oil industry been dealing with? They've been getting crushed by low oil prices. You know who started this war? It was Texas. I know they did. They're the ones that got Trump to do it, okay? And of course, the S&P 500, well, doesn't seem like they care at all. And even more interestingly, the dollar is up. Little fear in the world, money comes here, everything's fine for now. It's Wag the Dog, people. Anybody see that? Another Dustin Hoffman movie. That's my second Dustin Hoffman reference, okay? Seen Wag the Dog? Watch it. So wrapping it up, we could do a little Q&A. I'm sorry I'm talking too long, but things are fine. Yes, there's some drags in the economy, but in general, with more stimulus coming on board, with the dollar starting to rise, this economy is starting to pick up. As for Southern California, we just need housing. This nation needs workers. California needs workers. We are a lot different than Iowa. We're a lot different than Ohio. We're a lot different than Michigan. People want to live here. Give them an opportunity, they will be here. They will drive our economy forward. That's our choice. But we won't fix the choice. We won't fix the deficit. We won't acknowledge a bubble. Why? Because our narratives are so screwed up. Never in my life would I ever imagine being in this place right now. Never have we been richer. Never have we had more information at our fingertips. And yet never have we been stupider or crazier. And this is the cross we carry. It's as simple as this: broken narratives. Broken narratives influencing things at every level of society. And it's a shame. Because with a little bit of a deep breath and calming people down, the right choices are so easy to make. We just can't get through that narrative, and because it turns out it's easier to fool people and convince them they have been fooled. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. There's my QR code. You will not get the industrial stuff.
Check, check.
Check, check.
I'm checking the mic. That's awesome. I love it when Chris doesn't have like a timeline. He just goes.
I go. How long did I talk
plus,
about?
an hour,
Is it like Wednesday, Thursday now? What day is it?
It's awesome. Okay, this mic sounds weird. Does it sound weird, Adam? Do we need it? Q&A. It's time. Vicki, we got to start with you. You're the one that dropped the bombshell last time. Nobody has any questions? Look, Leap does.
Which is? Yeah.
Well, we want to get it on the video. All right, so if you got some questions, I don't want to force it, but I'll ask all the questions then. If Leap, you're up.
You mentioned not enough building and apartments.
Yeah.
Do you think that will potentially raise rent prices?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, say, okay, I'm worried about inflation, I'm worried about the decline in the bubble, where should I go? The answer should be residential real estate. But I would go low leverage, right? You want to be in a position to deal with what's going to happen when rates start to go up, right? You want to make sure you're locking in on longer run rates. Don't go short term. Don't over borrow. Don't play the stupid Wall Street games of trying to squeeze every tiny bit of yield out of your property, because that just puts you in a position where any kind of change in fundamentals puts you into a hole. So it's really conservative investments. Look, people want housing. Simple as that. You know, one of the things is, and let me back up for a second, because it's a great question. Let me explain something. Go back to your microeconomic days. And one of the things your professor probably told you, which you remember for the multiple choice test and you immediately forgot, was the idea that there are inferior goods, normal goods, and luxury goods. And the difference between those two all have to do with how you respond to income increases, right? An inferior good, your income goes up, you want less of it. Peanut butter is an inferior good. I get richer, I'm going to eat less peanut butter. Housing is a luxury good, which means if your income goes up by 10%, you're going to increase your spending on housing by more than 10%. Because housing is where the majority of happiness in your life is going to come from. This is one of the things that makes me crazy when people like Richard Green at USC go, oh, nobody should spend more than 30% of their income on housing. Yeah, they should, and they could if they want to. One of the most common new households in Southern California right now is one person renting a 2-bedroom apartment. And they want the second bedroom for their home office when their friend comes to visit, or maybe for their puppy when they need to put the puppy away. Whatever it is, they're probably spending 35% or 40% of their income, but they're not going to go out and get a roommate because they don't want to. They'd rather spend a little money. That's a choice, not a burden. And I'm exhausted when these professors making $300,000 a year sit in their gilded little cage explaining to us, oh, that person's suffering. Doesn't look like it to me. They can still afford their $20 smoothie from Erewhon or whatever the hell the thing cost. Man, did I sound like a grumpy old man there, didn't I? I went right for a grumpy old man.
Yeah, I was like, why are you yelling at me?
Things are falling off of me.
You're yelling at me. I love it.
I dropped my pipe this morning. It was terrible.
It's all good.
Completely different, but you mentioned interest rates inevitably going up.
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5 years, interest rates go up,
Yeah.
demand comes down, housing prices likely fall.
No. Look, housing prices do not fall unless there is a housing foreclosure catastrophe. They don't. Even in the 70s, for all the huge increase in interest rates, home nominal prices didn't fall. Now, it doesn't mean prices are going to continue to go up. What happens is people become really resistant to taking a lower price for their property, and they sit on it. And so you have a very flat market. There wasn't a lot of sales going on in the 1970s either. That's another warning, another reason to watch out. You know, because that's going to mean not a lot of home sales. It's going to be flat as we're going through this period of inflation. That said, and I will continue, you know, my father was a real estate agent. I think I probably told you the story last year. And I asked him one time when he was still with us, I said, what were the best years? He said, best years for me, my best years for sales was 1983 and 1984. Wait a minute, mortgage rates were 13%. Didn't matter, they were coming down. The economy had cleared up. Inflation was cooling off. People were feeling the new economy emerging from that 1970s hole. It was a narrative. People wanted to buy. They wanted to move. And that's what drove that market. That's why that was his best year. Don't focus on the rate. Focus on the shifts in the narrative. That's what drives things.
We got one here. And then Gil, you're next.
In the short term, you don't think with Trump's Fed chair coming in, they're going to find a way to pressure rates down?
Well, first of all, again, go back to what I said. They can't pressure rates down. They don't have that power. Now, what they would do, because look, Trump doesn't care about what happens in 5 years. He's probably not going to be here in 5 years to care. All right? He only cares about right here, right now. Simple as that. And his initial inclination is going to be quantitative easing. I didn't really get to that because I was trying to hurry up a bit. But again, what happens? So suddenly the deficit is getting bigger. They need to do something. They go to Congress. You got to raise taxes. You got to cut spending. We can't do it. We don't have the political way to do it. What do? You turn to the Federal Reserve and you go, hey, man, give me some QE. We saw that game in 2020. QE, expansive money supply, it's inherently inflationary. But it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. So you start throwing a little QE at the economy, you're going to see exactly what you saw in 2021, 2022, which is a big drop in interest rates, a big surge in activity, but that was followed by the inevitable inflation surge, the change in Fed policy, and of course, the big increase in interest rates. And that 21 and 22 crazy period of housing demand, of housing sales, of home price appreciation was that gap between when they stepped on the gas, they stepped on the accelerator, and the consequences of the acceleration finally started to kick in. I would have assumed that's exactly where they're going. And if had he hired Kevin Hassett or whatever his name is, absolutely, right away. But you know what's interesting is Wall Street was already eyeing Trump suspiciously. And somewhere along the way, he shifted and went to Warsh, which is interesting because Warsh is a fiscal conservative. He's a monetary conservative. He's an inflation hawk. And that threw me for a loop. And I'm still not clear. Did he make a bad choice? Or does he have some pictures of Warsh in Las Vegas that Warsh doesn't want out? I don't know. I don't know. But it's certainly an interesting part of the equation. I don't know if Warsh does get in there, what kind of chairman he's going to be. We'll see.
For the real estate listing agent,
Yeah.
who would you say we should focus on? What demographic is buying and what type of stock are they buying, let's say in the next 12 months?
Look, it's higher income folks, right? Particularly folks candidly, from west of you, who are looking for a nicer house, a place to raise their family. You just look what's happening in places like Murrieta, what's happening in Rancho Cucamonga, the huge increase in incomes. A lot of this is those people who already live there doing better, but you see this middle class move into the Inland Empire because it's affordable, there are jobs out here, it's a beautiful place to raise a family, and yeah, you can get back to the coastal cities for work or whatever as you need to. You're not that far away. And that's the push that's coming out here. That's who's been buying, and almost assuredly they will continue to buy. They're buying because of the relative affordability of the Inland Empire compared to Orange County and LA, and that's not going to change anytime in the near future. Now, mind you, that does become a problem for the Inland Empire economy. We have some folks representing the local economy here. And what they will tell you is the Inland Empire needs those people to work here. And a lot of those people may end up working over there, which is kind of a mixed blessing as the case may be. All economies next to these coastal urban economies that won't build housing struggle with this. Every house that gets built, will that house be lived in by a local worker or a commuting worker? And on that front, it's not quite sure where we're going.
Just to piggyback on the last question,
Yeah.
you're thinking it's likely going to turn to QE, increase in money supply, increase in inflation.
Yeah.
Doesn't that tend to lead to increase in property values?
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought you were saying relatively flat. We're not going to see a huge jump.
No. It'll feed through, but don't forget that it wobbles because you got to get through the inflation surge. As rates are going up, it pushes the market down. When rates peak and start to come down again, that's when everything explodes. Go back to 1983 and 1984. That's why I was telling you that story.
Let me jump in real quick. You're a friend of mine, Bruce Norris.
Yeah.
And you did his podcast, which I'm embarrassed that I've known about that for a couple of weeks and I still haven't listened to it.
It wasn't the best thing I've ever done, to be honest with you. It wasn't
Okay.
my best game.
Okay, well, you need to do it again. Bruce, most of you in this room know Bruce. He did his little market timing event. He'd be the first one to admit he's a little disconnected. I don't want to say he's semi-retired, but he's semi-retired. He has a take on AI,
Yeah.
which is completely different than yours.
Yeah, he's one of those
It's going to be
miserableists.
15% unemployment in the next 18 months.
Yeah, I know.
Interest rates
yeah.
plummet.
Yawn.
So when you did that podcast, you guys didn't even talk about that, or?
I can't. Maybe a little bit. I think I poo-pooed him, and he went on to something else.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you dismissed that completely.
How many times have we heard this? I showed you all the headline. Decade after decade after decade, there's somebody telling us, "Oh, this time is different."
So this time it's not different.
Look, AI is important, and I think everybody in this room needs to start using it. Right? It's a powerful tool to increase your personal productivity. It's not going to cut your hair anytime in the near future. It's not going to be picking strawberries. It's not going to be assembling cars. It's not that. The thing here is this. As impressive as AI is, AI needs to get plugged into the real world. And that process of plugging AI into the real world is going to be way harder than they pretend, because it always is harder. And because it's harder to plug it into the real world, that means it's evolution, not revolution. And jobs will shift and jobs will expand in different ways where AI can't be there. Now, look, I could be wrong. this could be the thing, right? But every forecaster uses the basic fact that while history doesn't repeat, it sure does rhyme. And the rhyme here tells me they're overselling it yet again, and this is not going to be that big of a deal. And until I see proof otherwise, because again, how many headlines do you hear right now about everybody getting laid off? There is no increase in claims for unemployment insurance in California right now. None. It's exactly the same today as it was 3 years ago. So if all these people are losing their jobs, where are they?
Next,
They're not.
but
They begin
when-
government, or they begin unemployment. That's my
Okay.
point.
Go ahead and ask your question. When you're done, though, turn that microphone off. I don't know if it's screwing with the audio with Adam, but these things
Yeah.
are very sensitive.
All right. So in my first act, I was in tech. So we may disagree on AI a little bit, but despite that, the narrative is out there.
Yeah.
So given that, what do you see the business environment and commercial real estate in general performing because of that jobs narrative?
I mean, I'm not sure what you mean. Like, what commercial real
I mean,
estate?
like,
It's
do we see it like going up, down, staying stable? Given the job market,
yeah. Like, if you look at
narrative
office
out there.
space, take office space for example. Okay, there's too much office space. In part because people are working remote, maybe because they're using some AI, whatever the case may be. There's been a decrease in demand for office space, and places like LA and San Francisco have way too much of it. That's not complicated. You need to tear it down, put up housing because we don't have enough housing. The problem is getting them to just make the right choices to do that. You know, they shouldn't do adaptive reuse. They should be walking around with a big red crayon going, gone, gone, gone. These buildings will all be demolished in 6 months. Get your shit out, and we're going to build housing. That would solve a lot of problems right there. Solve a ton of problems, and it's something you can do. Inland Empire, by the way, has the lowest vacancy rate for office in California right now. There's not enough office space here, and they're not building any. So what market are we talking about, right? Retail. Some retail is doing great. Some's not, but retail has always been changing. Industrial, I pointed out to you, the problem with industrial is there's too much of it, but it's still a critical part of our economy. So we still need commercial real estate. Obviously not going anywhere. Look, if nothing else, we need to stick someplace to stick all these computers and robots, right? And that means we need space. So real estate is not going away. Yes?
Getting back to the numbers that you have as unemployment, wondering where, I mean, is that accurate? Because I'm thinking about all these people that have lost their jobs, a lot of immigrants. They can't claim any benefits. Has anything done with the numbers of the number of immigrants that have lost their job? Has those been taken in consideration
okay, so
into the unemployment?
yeah, the unemployment rate is not, the unemployment rate is not contingent on your status, right? When they go out and they survey people to say, do you have a job? Do you not have a job? Or you're looking for a job? That is based on a population survey. There's nowhere in there do they try to exclude non-citizens. Nowhere in there do they ever ask your citizenship status. Nothing. So in theory, those people are captured in there. Simple as that. The thing to keep in mind on this, though, go back to what I just said, is they're leaving. The data suggests. Hey, maybe back up for a second. First of all, one thing. I have a scary little fact to tell you is we don't know how many people live in this country. We don't know how many people are actually in our labor force. We don't because we're not tracking people coming here. So I don't know. That said, we have some rough count. In the last few years, when things were really surging, about 3 million people a year came here, and the data now suggests about 1 million people are leaving. So the swing is in the other direction. The people are actually leaving this country right now. And that's one of the reasons that labor markets feel tight, even though there's not really a lot of job growth. We're in a very weird labor market, one of the weirdest labor markets, because there's been a decrease in supply and demand at the same time. So that's kind of the new equilibrium we're in. That said, no, I don't see any major dislocation among undocumented people, not for the most part. For the most part, they're laying low. A lot of them are staying here because their kids are here, and their kids were born here, and they're not going to leave their kids. I know some of these folks, and they're scared. They're not going out. But for the most part, they're still keeping their employment because, honestly, most people in California appreciate these people and we support them. I think that's a good thing.
So CAR shows their graph as rentals are going up, we're a rental state, and sales are coming down. And
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier that you thought we needed more rental.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. We do. Okay. So, yeah. The question is what about home ownership? What's happening on that particular front? California has a relatively low share of owners, but that's because California is a relatively urbanized economy, and we have a lot of lower income folks, particularly, say, in the Central Valley. The two of those things do mean we're a little bit more of a renter state than other places, as the case may be. And honestly, when you think about the kind of housing we really need, it's mainly multifamily. It's mainly multifamily, what I would call lower price multifamily space. That would really help the economy grow in a lot of different ways. I don't worry about single family so much, not so much, but we don't need more single family too. We absolutely need more single family. But the single family market, the single family builders have a little bit more, they have a little more play. They can get it done, if they want. How many units could Edo build if he wanted to without blinking?
Well, we're going to talk about that before we're done, but
Yeah.
what was the number out here? 300,
Yeah, that new development here. That was in over here. And that, by the way, it's so interesting because while most of the state is standing still, there are certain places that I look and I see what I would call the kind of exciting entrepreneurs who are really focused on doing the right thing. And you take Edo here in Moreno Valley, 20,000 housing units, wow. That's a year and a half supply for the entire Inland Empire, all by itself. Huge lift. You can also go the next step on that and look at, has anybody been following California Forever? And they're talking about building a brand new city with 300,000 people with an enormous industrial zone in just north of the waterway there, north of Contra Costa in Solano County. There are places, there are people who are dreaming big because they recognize that California still has plenty of potential. We just have to lean in on it. The problem is we need that kind of entrepreneurialism in a lot more places, and we need local governments to be leaning in and working with those folks as opposed to fighting them tooth and nail, which seems like they are mainly inclined to do. That's the biggest problem we have. No. No. Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. It's a mess, right? We need housing liquidity. There's no doubt about it. We need to get rid of capital gains. We need to get rid of Prop 13 and all that kind of stuff. But we're not capable in making the easy choices. It's hard to see us making the hard ones. Oh, they got the new T-shirt on there. Excellent.
Thank you. Hey, I was wondering, I heard you say this last time about Prop 13. How come you don't like Prop 13? Just curious.
Because it's the most regressive, stupidest tax ever invented in the history of mankind. Oh, except for the fact that I've owned my house for 20 years. I love it. And that's the key. I want to be clear on that. Because you asked me that, do you like Prop 13 or not? Are you asking the economist or are you asking the homeowner? As a homeowner, I get it. I love it. Man, I bought my house in 2005. My property taxes are third what they would be if I bought my house in today's market. Maybe half. So individually, sure, it benefits me. But I also appreciate, from an economist standpoint, again, violently regressive. Benefits the rich, doesn't help the poor at all. Absolutely. Who gets the biggest exemptions on this? You're looking at me like you can't believe I just said that. Yeah, I'm sorry. An 80-year-old woman living in a $5 million house in Newport Beach, that she's been in for 50 years, pays nothing. The next door neighbor who just moved in, who's a young family trying to kick off, and he's paying full property tax at current market value. You think that's fair? Of course not. It's nonsensical. And it reduces liquidity, which is, of course, really, really problematic. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying raise property taxes and give it to the government so they can pay off the unions. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is California, we're not a high tax state. California is a stupid tax state. We're really, really fond of high taxes on small bases And then we leave much of our economy highly undertaxed. That is not a good way of doing things. We could, if we could actually have a real conversation and sit down and reform the California tax system, you could probably raise more money and be more business friendly if you just made some of the right decisions. But again, that ain't going to happen. Prop 13, you don't have to worry about my opinion, this brain or that brain, because it's not going anywhere. It's absolutely irrelevant. Well, that just makes the regressive quality of it even worse. So yes, this brain, like that rule. And by the way, we have some of that. We have Prop 60. But this brain says still doesn't work.
We're going to take one more, and then I'm going to wrap up in a few minutes, and then we're going to go to Chili's. So you got it.
What are you most excited about coming this year? Because you've talked a lot about different things, but genuinely, like, what are you personally more excited about?
Son, I'm an economist. I am not allowed to be optimistic. I could lose my license answering a question like that. What am I excited about? I'm excited about what's happening here in Moreno Valley. I'm excited about Ito's big visions. I'm excited about the fact that the industrial industry is working with me to push back on some of this nonsense. They've been laying there and letting themselves get run over, and they're finally standing up and saying, no more of this. And we need to start pushing back and start correcting the narrative. I'm excited about what they're talking about up in Solano County. I'm excited about the fact that, yes, one or two of the gubernatorial candidates is not a complete idiot. In fact, my favorite candidate, and I'm just going to put it out there, is Mayor Mahan from San Jose, who's one of the brightest guys I've met in a very long time. And, man, I'm going to give him my credit. I'm going to give him my support and try to hopefully make it, because we could get a better governor, which would be a nice thing as well. I'm excited about the fact that I live in California. Look, for those people who are born and raised here who can't possibly appreciate it, I'm from Rochester, New York, and I am not going back to Rochester, people. You are not making me. We're the future of this state, and this state has got so much potential. It's just a function of us getting our collective heads out of our collective you-know-whats in order to take advantage of it.